caught by his own car? Experts say clues hiding in his car's computer system could spell trouble for Brian Koberger, the man accused of killing 4 Idaho college students.
We can pull things like his contacts, his call logs, as well as some navigation and track point data that show his location.
It's called vehicle digital forensics, and it's changing the way murders are solved.
The car is, I guess, what we would like to call a gold mine in terms of forensics.
Even breathing new life into some cold cases.
We didn't know for sure that there was foul play until his body was discovered.
Rhonda French says her dad's murder went unsolved for years until a detective learned about vehicle forensics. Detectives say the key to solving the crime wasn't DNA or even fingerprints, but the computer system built into Ronald French's truck. By tapping into it, investigators say they found a time-stamped recording of the killer's voice, placing him at the scene of the crime.
When they found that, it was just like the clincher.
Prosecutors say when confronted with all that, Joshua Wessel pleaded guilty to the murder of Ronald French. So how does it work? Before we had experts hook into this car's computer infotainment system, I went for a little test drive. First, I fueled up at this gas station. Then I made a stop at this Starbucks. Back on the highway, I needed a little road trip music, so I put on one of my favorites. Shuffle Prince. Now shuffling Prince.
This is what it sounds like when the doves cry.
Time to get back to work. Call Megan.
Calling Megan Lupo.
Call Charlie.
Calling Charlie Mikoravi.
Okay, Jake, you ready?
I'm ready.
Then I brought the car to Jake Green's team at Envista Forensics.
Oh, yeah.
In a matter of minutes, Jake's team carefully extracted the computer from inside.
There we go. This is the motherboard of our infotainment system, which holds the keys to the castle.
So, were they able to tell everywhere I went?
Lisa, my guys got you. The first place you stopped at down there is a gas station. It's a Circle K. Did you get gas?
I did.
And you went to a Starbucks. Did you get me a coffee?
I got me a coffee.
He could also pull info on who I was talking to.
At 11:52, you called Charlie McElravy at 517.
Don't say anymore. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he's part of our team. Who else did I call?
At 11:55, you called Megan Lupo at 201.
And could even tell what music I was listening to.
You listened to a Prince song.
Wait, you were able to even determine what I was listening to in the car.
That's exactly right.
And he says similar personal information from 17 other phones were stored on this car.
Hi, this is Kim Bradley with Magnet Forensics. Today we'll be learning how to process vehicle data by using an exported extraction from Berla's IV software. First, to get the extraction, you'll need to export using IV. You can do this by going to Tools, Export, and Magnet. This will generate an export with an IVO extension. Now we're ready to bring the exported file into Axiom. With Axiom process already open, we'll go to our evidence sources. We'll select Vehicle, IV, Files and Folders, and then we're going to browse to the file that we need. I'll select the IVO file that was exported using IV software. You can rename the evidence if you would like, and go to Processing Details. We'll skip on down to the Vehicle Artifacts, and you'll see that we have the Location and Travel category that has been selected for us. Go to Analyze Evidence, and then we'll come back and take a look at our process case. Within the Axiom processed case, let's take a look at the artifacts. Within communication, you see call logs and contacts. It's important to note that these categories may include data that was downloaded from a mobile device connected to the vehicle. Depending on what is allowed at the time of connectivity, phone data may be saved. This will vary depending on the type of phone and vehicle. These categories may also include calls initiated using the vehicle's console or interface. Other categories include media that contains files in the exported extraction. After selecting an individual artifact, the examiner can always use source linking to navigate to the selected file within the File System Explorer, or use information in the Details pane for further analysis. Metadata will contain details extracted from the export related to the original acquisition of data from the vehicle or the vehicle itself. Attached devices will help examiners know of other potential evidence items. In location and travel, there are track points for logged entries of location coordinates, velocity points for the velocity of the vehicle at particular dates and times, and also waypoints for street addresses the user has entered on the vehicle. For a visual depiction of location data, you can always use the World Map view. Thanks for watching.
Today we're discussing how to import an IVX file from Ivy, Berla's vehicle analysis tool. Vehicles may store data about devices that have connected to the vehicle, as well as GPS locations and events. We already have the IVX file, so we've opened a new Blacklight case. We add the IVX report as we would any other evidence. When the Add Evidence window appears, we simply add the report and select the processing options. We're leaving the options at their default triage settings. The Evidence Status window appears to show us each of the areas being processed. When complete, we select the evidence item to view its data. While we can look at all of the case data within Blacklight's browser view, we've chosen to see each data type within Blacklight's parsed data tabs. Actionable Intel. Device Connections reveals the devices that were connected to the vehicle system, the type of connection, its serial number or MAC address, and, when present, the device's friendly name. Under Recent Items, we see the list of audio files from connected devices that were detected by the vehicle. Looking under Communication, we can see the phone calls related to various phones and the contacts associated with the number. All of the contacts listed for the connected devices are revealed, along with the device with which each is associated. Under Locations, Location Data, we see all GPS data from the vehicle in one window. As with all GPS data within Blacklight, the Location tab in the File Content Viewer reveals a map of the point of interest. Under System Logs, we can see all events that were tracked by the vehicle. In this data, we see the end of a track log and the time of the infotainment system being changed. Looking further into the data, we see door events, ignition events, and gear shifts. Events commonly track when devices are connected.
So my talk today is on vehicle forensics, and I'm going to take you through the history a little bit of vehicle forensics. And when we talk about vehicle forensics, I think the first thing people think about are black boxes. But I had the opportunity to approach an infotainment system specialist on a murder case that myself and my partners Tom Breen and Todd Pugh in Chicago had a few years ago, and it's really interesting technology. In terms of the lawyers in this room, how many of you have had Cellebrite on your cases? Pretty much everybody? Looks like about 85% of the room. How many of you, in comparison, have had Berla on your criminal cases? So maybe three people. Berla it's the Cellebrite for vehicles and the infotainment systems in the vehicles. So infotainment system, different than the black box. If you're in the actual vehicle, the black box is underneath the steering wheel, and the infotainment system is the computer screen that you see in the vehicle. They used to only be associated with luxury vehicles, but now more and more, every vehicle that is rolling off the production lot has an infotainment system in it. And those are computers very much like the cell phones that we carry in our pockets, and have been a unique focus of Fourth Amendment law and of privacy law in the country. So that's what my talk has to do with today, and I'll take you through a little bit of the history of what we can call, I guess, connected cars or smart cars and the timeline of that, the major components of vehicle forensics, I think, are a few different categories. So black boxes, GPS, and then the infotainment systems. Black boxes, which are also called event data recorders, were invented in Australia in the 1950s. The purpose was to record flight data as well as voices and sounds in the cockpit prior to the crash. Later, they're adopted into trains and motor vehicles, and now we have them in vehicles. You see them in accident reconstruction work and in major on-vehicle accidents. So they don't typically activate if it's a pedestrian versus motor vehicle accident, but they activate when there's major accidents. And they record both the sounds before and after the crash event, and those are the devices that law enforcement pull after a major crash. So they're relatively limited in terms of the information that they provide, and the ones that are in airplanes are much more sophisticated and more detailed in the information that they provide. The forensics tool that is used, referred to, it's the Bosch crash data retrieval tool. You see on there, it's the green thing right there that is connected to the computer and then connected underneath the steering wheel. But that Bosch crash data retrieval tool, it plugs into the port under the steering wheel that your mechanic uses to repair a car. It's widely used, and it is available, and police departments throughout the nation have them. It's because it's not particularly costly, and it's not particularly hard to use. So those devices are prevalent throughout law enforcement agencies in the country. GPS, we know GPS, it's on our phones, it's on our computers that are in our cars. So it's created in the Sputnik era. Scientists track satellites with shifts in radio signal called the Doppler effect. And the US Navy conducted satellite navigation experiments in the 1960s to track submarines with nuclear weapons. So GPSs, we all rely on them. I use Waze every day when I'm coordinating different cities and the fastest route to get me to a place. So we rely on GPS a lot, and GPS has been an important component of some of the Fourth Amendment law that the Supreme Court has dealt with in Jones, and I think will be very important when our courts and the Supreme Court approach the privacy and constitutional protections that people have to the data that's in the infotainment system. Here is the kind of the chronology of smartphones in terms of what they look like and what they're able to do. So nowadays, Apple launches a new iPhone, I think every September traditionally, and now they very much are like our computers, right? So most of the day we're on them, and in terms of functionality, if you get into somebody's cell phone, you're able to see their entire lives, which is, of course, true with our clients. And in the last two trials that I've had, including the Corey Morgan trial that I'll talk about, the data that was pulled off our client's cell phone became some of the most damning evidence in the case. So the ability of law enforcement to get into your client's smartphone can be the difference between your client getting charged and not charged, released from the station without charges, or it can be the difference between an acquittal and a conviction in a criminal case. They contain a great deal of information about your client. This is what is said to be the first smartphone, the IBM Simon Personal Communicator. It's said to be the first smartphone because it's got a touch screen, and you're able to communicate over email and fax on that SPC device. This is kind of the smartphone that we know now is the Apple iPhone, and if you look at your iPhone, there's going to be a ton of different data on there. So if you go into my iPhone, I probably have 90, 100 apps. If you go on there, you could access a lot of information about myself, my family, where I've been, and also a lot about my clients, right? So, because our phones are very much our mobile computers. So you can get into my Dropbox, you can get into my email, my text messages, my photos, my videos. And through this window, you can map a person's life and know a lot about them. Political affiliation, medical data, biometrics, some of the more sensitive areas of data. So that brings us to kind of what I think is a distinction in the law about when courts approach the searches of new devices in the digital era. And I think a theme that has emerged from Jones and Riley and Carpenter is that digital information is fundamentally, it's categorically different than when we talk about physical items. Digital privacy, passcodes, and biometrics. Anybody that has a smartphone is familiar with the different ways that we're able to safeguard our information. So in terms of lawyers in this room, how many of you have a passcode on your cell phone that is 6 digits or more? Okay. How many of you have a passcode that is 12 digits or more and it's alphanumeric? Okay. So I don't suggest this, but I have a passcode on my phone that is 17 digits, it's alphanumeric. And I have that because in learning about this stuff, I found out through talks with Mike Price, who's at the Fourth Amendment Center for NACDL, and from talking to Lars Daniel at Invista, that is what allows me to keep my data very close to safe. So when I first talked to Mike Price, I had a compelled decryption case in Chicago, and we were ordered our client to give up his passcode. Search warrant had been issued, a reckless homicide investigation, pre-charging, search warrant issues. We politely decline to give up our passcode based on the advice of his attorney. They go to court and they get a compulsion order. Okay, now you're compelled to give up your passcode. In talking to Mike Price and fashioning a motion to ask the judge to reverse that order, I said to Mike, well, I've got a 6-digit passcode. How long will it take law enforcement to get into my phone? And he says, well, I think with a 6-digit passcode, and this was 3 years ago. So with a 6-digit passcode, it would take law enforcement 17 hours to get into your phone, less than a day. With a 4-digit passcode, those are kind of what is commonly thought of as the defaults in terms of the settings. So a lot of people don't know that you can go in, you can make your passcode longer. 4-digit passcode, less than an hour. So, there's a search warrant, they hook up the device to Cellebrite, and they can crack a phone with a 4-digit passcode within an hour. 6-digit, less than a day. So what I did was I went into my settings, which I didn't know I could do, and I did a 12-digit passcode, which was not terribly hard to do or frustrating like the one that I have now, because I already had a 6-digit passcode, and I just did it twice. It's easy, right? So I felt pretty good about that. I felt like, I'm ahead of the curve. I'm really protecting my data. And then at the last NACDL meeting in Austin, I talked to Lars Daniel from Invista, and I said, do you have Cellebrite? Yeah, we have Cellebrite. You got Burla? Yeah, we have Burla. I said, okay, well, I have a 12-digit passcode. How long will it take you to crack my phone? And Lars said, well, he said, is it alphanumeric? And I said, no, it's not. And he said, well, anywhere from 2 hours to 30 years. And I was thinking, I thought that it was going to take over 100 years for them to get into my phone. Me, like most of our clients, not that I have anything to worry about on my cell phone, other than like the most intimate details of my life and my clients' lives. So I changed it to a 17-digit alphanumeric passcode, and that's where we are. But it's frustrating, but I feel pretty good about it, that I'm protecting my data from companies, law enforcement, or thieves. I mean, these things do get stolen, and I don't want it to get broken into and all that data to be revealed to the world. So that is the advice that I give to my clients is that. Oh, let me ask one more thing. How many of you have biometrics in terms of a password protection? Thumbprint, facial recognition to get into your phone. Okay, so probably about 30%, 40% of the room. As we approach privacy and Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment protections, there's different cases that have grappled with these issues about the contents of your mind and what that means to produce that in a Fifth Amendment context. And what has emerged is that biometrics have very little protection. So basically presenting my face or a thumbprint to my phone or to law enforcement it's similar to being presented in a police lineup, right? There's nothing that's constitutionally protected about that. Courts have differed on that, but what they've said, I think uniformly, is that if you have a passcode, that reveals the contents of your mind. You have to go into the recesses of your mind to know what your passcode is, and especially if it's like 17 digits and you're always messing it up. So Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, I always tell all my clients, take the thumbprint off, take the facial recognition off. There's a number of reasons to take facial recognition off, but both is that it does not protect your client's data, and if compelled to do so, your client has lesser protections under the law if he or she has a biometric, either a thumbprint or a face, to access and unlock the phone. So that's what I tell all my clients. Get rid of the biometrics, get a long passcode, 12, 13 digits, alphanumeric, and in that way, listen, a judge can compel your client to give up the passcode, and they'll have the opportunity to do that and comply or take the contempt. But I think any time when presented with that situation, I would like at first to make sure that I'm on the soundest constitutional ground that I have, and then maybe take your contempt, and especially if there's something in the phone that may make the case against your client. So that is the advice that I give to all my clients, and that I would share with you as well, because I think that it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Like that's a difference between a passcode and a thumbprint, but for some reason, the courts have made that distinction, and we should be in front of that issue, because the more and more law enforcement is moving towards dumping our clients' phones, getting that data and making that case based on the data that it provides. So that brings us to the infotainment systems. They're also called onboard systems. You see how it looks externally there in the passenger compartment. So it's the screen in the middle of the vehicle. Just because it'll tie in later. Did anybody rent a car when they came to Vegas for this trip? No? Okay. Well, it'll tie in later, but basically, if you rent a car and you plug your phone in, it's not advisable because of all the data that it sucks down. So the infotainment system, you can connect your phone with Bluetooth or USB, and here is the CEO of Burla, Ben Lemaire, who trains law enforcement throughout the nation. They have a partnership with law enforcement, and they have a forensic toolkit that dumps all the data from the modules on the computer, the infotainment system of vehicles.
I think a lot of people right now who are listening to this are probably thinking, well, yeah, but I have to do something special for my car to download all that information, or I have to hook it up in a certain way.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We use this scenario all the time in our training. If you're on a flight, you fly in, you rent a car, and your phone died, you're going to get in the car and you're going to plug it in. And there's going to be this nice, convenient USB port right there for you. When you plug it into the USB port, it's going to charge your phone, absolutely. And as soon as it powers up, it's going to start sucking all your data down into the car. There's one manufacturer in particular that will ask you, do you want to download your contact list? And of course, being a rental car, you would say no. And it honors that one thing, but it takes everything else that it can get its hands on. It's funny. I mean, they actually said, well, people care about their contact list, and little do they know that their entire text messaging database is being sucked out onto the car. So it's
Shocking, right? I mean, your whole phone is downloaded into a rental car, text messages, medical data, your communications with people sucked down into a rental car for the world to have access to, in companies and potentially law enforcement. And what's different about these systems, fundamentally different, is that, yeah, they contain massive amounts of highly personal data about ourselves. But, and Tesla may have a new model that does this. I know of no manufacturer that has a password protection on these devices, right? So on any of our own vehicles, I have a vehicle, I bought it used, and I can see on there a little about the previous owner's life. So there's locations where they lived, their favorites in terms of contacts. And I have an older car, so I don't have the most updated Tesla. But what everybody says who works in this field is it pulls down more and more information as the modules in the infotainment systems get more sophisticated and Burla's technology gets more sophisticated. So in the fact that there is no mechanism to safeguard your privacy is deeply troubling. So that's Burla. Burla, it's founded in 2008 by Ben Lemaire, the CEO that you just heard speak. Works closely with state and federal law enforcement. It's had a partnership with the federal government for the last 6 or 7 years, specifically with the Department of Homeland Security. And Burla went from the analysis of handheld GPS devices like Garmin's and TomToms to the more sophisticated infotainment systems that are now a part of our daily lives. They launched this IV vehicle forensics tool in 2013, which is the same tool they use now. They update it multiple times a year, and with each update, they can gather more information and they can dump the data on more types of vehicles. So they can, I think I saw that they now can dump the data from about 20,000 different types of vehicles. The Burla will acquire and then analyze the data from that infotainment system, the reports, and I'll show you a part of one to you. There's an examination report from the Morgan murder case in your materials. The acquisition reports are longer reports. They're similar to Cellebrite reports that you would have seen. They contain hundreds and hundreds of pages of data and a lot of different categories of data. So what is your client's vehicle reveal? I think I've already touched on these a bit, but communications, text messages, emails, contact lists, call logs, navigation history, and medical data, and then applications and passwords. So that brings us to the murder trial of Corey Morgan. Corey was charged with two co-defendants by the name of Dwight Doty and Kevin Edwards. When the case made its way to trial, Kevin Edwards had pled. Corey went to trial with Dwight Doty, and it would have been a death penalty case if Illinois still had the death penalty, because the victim of the crime was a 9-year-old who had been lured into an alley, shot execution style, and it was based on a purported motive that was attributed to Corey Morgan, that this was revenge for the killing of his brother and the shooting of his mother, and in the context of a gang feud. Here's a clip that kind of sets the scene of that crime and the eventual investigation and trial.
In Chicago today, there was a tragic revelation in the murder of a 9-year-old boy. Dean Reynolds is on that story.
All week, Chicago has been asking why 9-year-old Tyshawn Lee was murdered in this alley. And now the police have supplied a horrifying answer.
We believe that Tyshawn was targeted, lured to this spot, and murdered.
Gary McCarthy is Chicago's police superintendent.
Probably the most abhorrent, cowardly, unfathomable crime that I've witnessed in 35 years of policing.
Tyshawn was on his way to his grandmother's on Monday afternoon when he joined others in the alley near her house. That's when the boy was swept up into a bloody feud here involving two rival factions of the same gang. His execution was the latest in a series of vengeful assaults going back months. Police say Tyshawn's father, Pierre Stokes, is an active member of one of those gang factions, and they believe that's the reason his son was targeted. Stokes himself agrees his son was intentionally killed.
If it wasn't a target, he wouldn't have got hit so many times in the back and the face. You know what I'm saying? I think he was targeted.
So that sets the scene. Murder of a 9-year-old in Chicago. International media attention and pressure on the Chicago Police Department. The investigation, there was a federal task force with the Chicago Police Department and different agencies to find out what had happened to Tyshawn Lee. So the investigation starts. Prosecution's narrative or theory of the case was a gang shooting, happened in broad daylight. It was based on a gang rival between the Black Pea Stone Terror Dome Stones, a set of them called the Bang Bang Gang, BBG, and the Kill Award faction of the Gangster Disciples. Tyshawn Lee's father being a member of some prominence of the Kill Award section, and Corey Morgan, his brothers and his co-defendants being purported members of the BBGs. The victim, of course, a young, innocent, sympathetic child, lured away from the park with the promise of candy and juice, shot execution style, based on who his father was. City was not safe from the ruthless killers, witnesses were in danger, and of course there was intense public and media coverage of the murder and the investigation. What emerged as the vehicle that was involved in the homicide, because the homicide happened on November 2nd, 2015, shortly after school had let out. It was about, it was right after school, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there were eyewitnesses at Dawes Park, which is at 80th and Damon on the south side of Chicago in the Auburn-Gresham neighborhood. There was kids from the high school and the middle school that was close there to Dawes Park playing basketball in the park who became the eyewitnesses, and the eyewitnesses identified a black SUV that was circling the block, went down the alley right before the murder. So the Chicago Police Department focus in on a black SUV as being the suspect vehicle involved in this heinous murder, and they recover a black SUV, a 2015 Ford Edge, that was abandoned and trashed and had white substance throughout the interior of it that they thought was bleach. And they recovered that vehicle in Dalton, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago, and the Illinois State Police recovered the infotainment system module, and they sent it out to Burla to be analyzed. So you see there on the bottom left, right there, is the infotainment system that is common in these vehicles, and the murder happened at the end of 2015. This was a 2015 model vehicle, so it was a rental car that was reported stolen, and there was certain information over the months between production and being on the streets and then being ultimately recovered. This here is the module, the infotainment module from the inside, and here's another photo of the module from the infotainment system. So they send this module to Maryland to be analyzed by Burla. And Burla has this forensics tool called IV that they launched in 2013. And unlike the Bosch system when it comes to black boxes, the Burla devices, they're not that prevalent in local law enforcement. There's some state police agencies that have them, but they are very expensive. And the other thing is that there's just not that many people that are trained on how to use them. So as we approach these cases, I think proficiency of your local, because I think they will proliferate. We will see these in every major police department throughout the nation, much like we do with Cellebrite in the years coming. So proficiency of examiners and also the Fourth Amendment protections that our clients have to the data on their vehicles. Of course, in this case, it was a vehicle that was associated with a co-defendant. It was abandoned, so there was no Fourth Amendment challenge to the data that was recovered. And the data that was recovered was pretty precise, and it was pretty convincing that it was corroborated by other information, had the vehicle by Dawes Park, had the vehicle going to Lansing later in the day, whereas my client lived with his girlfriend and some of her family members. And so when we approach cross-examination, we use that data in approaching and cross-examining the state's expert, who was Ken Case from Burla. In this case, the software is expensive, but also the time is expensive. So in this case, because of the nature of the case, pre-trial, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and the Chicago Police Department, they split the cost, but Burla had a bill of approaching $30,000 pre-trial for all the parsing of the data, analysis of the data, and then ultimately Ken Case comes into town to testify in the murder trial. And this was a trial that there was not going to be any expense or manpower spared. So they flew in a DNA specialist and probabilistic genotyping from Australia, and they flew in a guy from Burla from Maryland because this was a case that they wanted very hard to prove and get convictions and long sentences, understandably. This is an acquisition report from Burla. So this is like the dumping of the data, the extraction, acquisition report. As you can see down here, it's about 700-page report, so not quite a Cellebrite report, but a lot of data. And then you have here kind of the general categories of data that exist on the infotainment system. So attached devices, like cell phones and any other devices connected by Bluetooth or USB, text messages, call logs, contacts, locations, events, which become important, and tracks. And that's not like tracks like, urgent. That's tracks like tracking data, GPS, and then files. So these are the attached devices, and you see a lot of different names here. So there's a bunch of iPhones: Ashley Brown, Charbon, Chauncey, Jesh, Kingston, Steve, Zare. And then you have unique identifiers, Bluetooth addresses, serial numbers that are associated with all those different devices that connected to the infotainment system of the Black Ford Edge. And it was important to us that it didn't say Corey Morgan's iPhone. I mean, I think my iPhone would show up as like Jonathan's iPhone 2 or something like that, which would be pretty good evidence, especially if Corey Morgan's iPhone, it's identified as Corey Morgan's iPhone, he's in that vehicle, and it connects to the vehicle, during the time period that the murder happened. We did not have that in this case, but we did have some 16 devices that attached to the infotainment system during the data period, which was about a year of data.
The CLE verification code for this program is A9A062. A9A062.
Here you've got events, and these are different events that are associated with the vehicle, like shifting into reverse, neutral, park. You've got phone events, so those are different phones that are connecting to the infotainment system in the vehicle, and they show the date and time, and they show the GPS coordinates. So it becomes pretty important in terms of showing when exactly the person that's associated with the phone was in the vehicle. Then you've got gear shift events here, which I already covered, but also has the date and time and GPS coordinates. You've got door events, so door open, door closed, passenger door open and closed. This was important for Corey Morgan's case because the theory was all three individuals were in the vehicle at the time of the murder. In preparing for cross-examination, I interviewed Ken Case and asked him some questions about, frankly, I didn't know anything about Burla, like many of us don't, because I had never seen it on a case before. And so I had a lot of questions about the different reports that he issued, the acquisition reports, the examination reports, and what the capabilities of the Burla system was. So in this case, what we found out was the rear doors on this particular module, based on the IV tool that they had at the time, because it varies based on those things, that the rear doors were not monitored in any way, right? So you have front door and front passenger, but not rear door, not trunk, anything like that. And you also didn't have things that would be relevant to knowing how many people are in the vehicle, like weight, right? I mean, you have 3 people arrested, you have their heights and weights, and so you would be able to, if you were able to get a weight assessment, you would know how many people were in the vehicle. So we didn't have that in the case, and that was important to our preparation in terms of approaching this data and approaching the state's expert from Burla. These are what the tracks look like, and there's logical and recovered tracks. The recovered are ones that were recovered from the data that had been written over, but they were still able to be recovered. And if you see here, in terms of time, these are GPS coordinates, right? And they coincide with vehicle speed, and they coincide with a specific date and time. And the different times here, it's almost every second, right? And I think that becomes important, both in terms of how precise it is, but also in terms of when we analyze this from a Fourth Amendment perspective vis-a-vis Jones and Carpenter in terms of the long-term tracking of an individual's movements through GPS and other data. But a ton of data. So it's about 700 pages, the report. About 50% of that is just the GPS data. And like I said, very detailed, very precise, and long-term tracking of the vehicle. This is the examination report. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office had asked Ken Case and Burla to look at some specific addresses that were relevant to the case. The 3 that are highlighted here are an address on the south side. It's 106th and Green Street. It's Kevin Edwards, co-defendant's house, where he lived with his siblings at the time of October and November of 2015. You've got the Lansing house, which is our client Corey Morgan's girlfriend's house, where he lives with his girlfriend Robin and some of her family members. And then you have the location of the Tyshawn Lee homicide on November 2nd, 2015, right after school. So these become important because of what the witnesses were saying, and disregard the red highlights that were made in preparation for closing argument. This was the only transcript I had, but this is the motive here. This is from the state's opening statement, and they talk about motive and they talk about what the data on the vehicle can show. This is the prosecutor. They call themselves the BBGs. Pierre Stokes, Tyshawn Lee's father, he was a member of the Kill Awards. And back on October 13th of 2015, this feud escalated. And it escalated when Morgan's brother, Tracy Morgan, and Morgan's mother were shot. Morgan's mother survived, but Tracy Morgan was killed. Now, Tracy Morgan was a fellow BBG, and killing him was bad enough, but shooting Morgan's mother was beyond the pale. There weren't many rules in this feud, but family was off limits. They were untouchable, and so this made Corey Morgan mad. And he wasn't just mad, he was in a murderous rage, saying he was going to kill grandmas, mamas, kids and all, whomever he could catch. That becomes a very important statement of motive. And it'll come later, but that statement was attributed to Corey Morgan at Kevin Edwards' house on a certain date by Kevin Edwards' sister. Continuing on, later in the opening statement, the prosecutor says, and this defendant, Corey Morgan, he was identified by 4 different witnesses as being there. In that black SUV, it was later found abandoned in Dalton, Illinois, and it turns out that black SUV is a Ford Edge, the same Ford Edge that Kevin Edwards had been driving for about a month before Tyshawn's murder. And that Ford Edge has GPS and navigation capabilities. Now, GPS and navigation, they can get you where you need to go, and they can tell you which direction to go, but they can also tell where you've been. And I'll give you one guess where that Ford Edge was on November 2nd, 2015. It was circling Tyshawn's house, and it was parked near the mouth of that alley where Tyshawn Lee is ultimately killed. So the co-defendant's siblings, Kevin Edwards' siblings, his sister says, Corey Morgan, the day after his brother, Tracy Morgan, tea time, was killed, came over to the Edwards' house at 106th and Green, and when she was there, he says to Kevin Edwards, according to Kevin Edwards' sister, that the GDs, he used a different word, the GDs done tweaked when they killed tea time. Everybody must die, grandmas, mamas, kids and all. And when I say, that's what he said. According to her, this was the third-party admission that was put on blast at the bond hearing and was provided the motive that was attributed to Corey Morgan. This was personal. It had to do with his family, but it also had to do with his gang conflict. And Kevin Edwards' sister said, I knew specifically the date that this happened at my house because it was the day after Corey's brother was murdered. They came to the house. They were pissed. He asked to use my cell phone, and he made this statement about killing children. Kevin Edwards' brother had said that from October 1 through November 2, he saw Kevin, Corey, and DeWright, the 3 co-defendants, together on a daily basis at Kevin Edwards' family's house at 106th and Green. During that time, Kevin is driving the black Ford Edge. That is exactly what Robin Matthews, Corey Morgan's girlfriend's nephew, said. I'd see him every day. You know, he was always at Lansing. He was unemployed. He said, I basically never left the house. And they would come there, all 3 of them, every day, black Ford Edge, every day for a month. So what does the data show? Because Ken Case was asked very specifically, look at these addresses. What does the data show for 106th and Green? Shows that there's some data from October 20th, November 1st, October 29th, and October 31st. And for Lansing, it's only October 29th and November 2nd. So that becomes important. Absolutely no objective data from the Burla device that corroborates what the state said had occurred in terms of this statement that's attributed to Corey Morgan. Same thing as to, how often these witnesses said they saw all 3 together and at these different locations. So this is, and I'll take you through because I think I'm running short on time. This is the state's PowerPoint presentation that they showed to the jury. It was important in the preparation. They tried to show me some slides in court of this thing. And I was like, can I get the PowerPoint presentation? And it had all of Ken Case's notes in there and everything. And so the cross evolved, but there was a ton of information to mine from this device. So here's the PowerPoint presentation. The vehicle is at Old Farm Road in Lansing, Robin Matthews' house where Corey Morgan lives, at about 2 o'clock, a little before. And then it maps where it goes. It goes to a gas station up the street. There's video from there with Kevin Edwards on it, right? So it's showing the data is corroborating what we know to be true. No data. So there's no data for this period. And it's not because it was destroyed or anything like that. It had just been probably written over. So when it picks back up, we are by Dawes Park. And the black Ford Edge is going around And there was also an address in there that was an address that was attributed to Corey Morgan's family, which I thought was particularly interesting because, you know, if he had gotten into the vehicle, if the jury thought he had gotten into the vehicle, it's possible that he was dropped off over there. He certainly wasn't going to some place that he, you know, never went, and they went there to do this execution. So this is the vehicle's movements. The X is where the murder happened, in the alley there. And it's got recovered tracks. It's showing the different movements, the different events, shifts into reverse, shifts into parks, vehicle remains, passenger door closed, driver door open, USB device that's attached. And this is said to corroborate what the witnesses, the eyewitnesses, were saying occurred. Then there's no data, it picks back up around a little before 4 o'clock, and the vehicle's going around the neighborhood. And ultimately, arrives back at Dawes Park, up there in the top left. And then parks at Dawes Park around the time that Tyshawn Lee was there playing basketball on the playground. Different vehicle events, driver door open, closed, passenger door opened, closed, no data. And then the vehicle picks up going back to Lansing, where Corey Morgan lives with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's family members, including the nephew that testified against him. Bunch of different vehicle events at the Lansing house, consistent with people getting out of the vehicle. Going back to the gas station, video of Kevin Edwards on the gas station video, different vehicle events, and then no data, and then the vehicle data picks back up vehicles in Dalton. Last known position of the vehicles recorded in Dalton. So that's a trial. In preparation for the Cross of Ken case, it was important to emphasize the amount of data that was available to him and law enforcement. So, you know, I had all the acquisition reports there to show the jury just how much data we were talking about. I said, you know, he had done 3 different parsings of the data. He actually told me on the phone call that he did another one that the state didn't even know about with a new tool to just make sure that it was consistent and if there was anything else. But his findings were consistent, and that was important to show that the data is precise, because we accept what we can't really refute, but we use the data to show the witnesses, you know, they were not telling the truth about what they said Corey Morgan had said and what they said about that black Ford Edge being there every day. So they were gilding the lily. So what happened to Corey Morgan? 3-week trial. My partner Todd Pugh gave a brilliant closing argument. The jury deliberated for about 6-7 hours until 9 o'clock at night. The judge locked up the jury, took away their cell phones, sent them on a bus by escort of the sheriff's deputies. We found out some of this later, and they were put up at a hotel on the southwest side of Chicago. Not quite the Four Seasons. And they come back the next day, they deliberate through lunch, and ultimately Corey Morgan, as you all know in this room as defenders, becomes a victim of the trial penalty. So judge ultimately sentences him to 65 years. In Illinois, murder time is done at 100% for any murders nowadays. After 1998. The offer pretrial was 25 years. It was nothing, despite anybody talking to Corey, nothing that he was ever going to plead guilty or accept. So that was rejected on the record, understood the consequences and the exposure of going to trial, that if he was convicted, it would be and was a de facto life sentence. What the future holds for these infotainment systems, I'm running kind of short on time, so I'll be quick with this. But Fourth Amendment, and I'd invite all of you guys to come to Chicago next month. The Fourth Amendment Center is doing a 2-day free CLE on May 16th and the 17th at the Sofitel. It's going to be excellent, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Fourth Amendment in the context of the infotainment systems. But basically, there's a professor from William & Mary that has written this. It's a working paper. It's not published yet. But he takes the position that his theory is that courts will likely uphold warrantless searches of smart cars based on the automobile exception. He does not think that Riley, Jones, Carpenter will be extended to these smart cars. And there's a few different reasons why he says that. Smart cars hold less information. A lot of the vehicle information is already visible and available to the public. Cars are heavily regulated and receive less privacy protection. And police cannot use Faraday bags or tinfoil or airplane mode for vehicles in the automobile exception. It's not automatic like a search incident to arrest. It's based on probable cause. And that based on this, how slow the Supreme Court moves, that Congress and state legislatures should amend privacy statutes to require police to obtain warrants. In my experience in Chicago, they generally obtain warrants for this type of information. My theory, Dershowitz is wrong. Searches of smart cars require a warrant, and digital is fundamentally different. I think we talk about the long-term tracking of this stuff, of the vehicle. It's right on line with Jones and Riley about how sensitive this information is. And there's a case from Georgia, from their Supreme Court, about Fourth Amendment protections of the black boxes. A lot less information, and that those are subject to protection of the Fourth Amendment, and that the automobile and exigent circumstances exceptions to the warrant requirement do not apply to those types of searches of a black box. So there's a bipartisan bill that's been proposed in the Senate in November of last year, and it would close the loophole about warrantless searches of infotainment systems. And here's a quote from Jumana, from the director of the Fourth Amendment Center. I think I'm a little short on time, but probably have about 3 minutes for any questions. So the question is, what is the purpose of collecting all of the information on the vehicle from your phone? I think it's for convenience, right? I mean, when we're in our vehicles, we want the convenience of being able to have seamless connection to the vehicle so that we can make phone calls, we can access our Spotify, and we can access our files. We shouldn't be looking at our files while we're driving to court, but it's for convenience. The question is, does the data download even when you just connect based on Bluetooth, not USB? The answer, and it's complicated, but is yes. And it was, I included the testimony of Ken Case in the Morgan murder trial in your materials. So we talked a little bit about that because he had written some article that he said that he didn't write. But that was kind of on point. Do you need to connect? Does it have to be by USB or Bluetooth? And basically it dumps data no matter what.
Hi, yeah, can you talk about the timestamp that they get for the data? Where is that coming from? Is it from the car, from the phone? Was there any testimony from Burla on how that's reliable?
No, I'm not familiar with any. It's in terms of the time frame. I think that it's the capacity of the module, just like our computers, how much memory and data it can contain, and then at a certain point, like a computer or other digital devices, it writes over old data with newer data. But I don't think there's any outside capacity issue, if there's a large...
No, not the size, the time. How do they know the time is accurate?
How do they know the time exactly?
No, how it's accurate, like the timestamp, like we heard about yesterday with the cell phone towers. Those timings are probably more accurate because they're connected to a network. Where does the cars, like if it says it was at 10:24 and 16 seconds, where is that timestamp coming from?
I was one of the guys that raised their hand, like not terribly comfortable with cell phone towers yesterday, but I think it's based on, on GPS and, those different radio systems and antennas from phones or from the module itself. But it's a good question. I don't exactly know.
Presentation at lunch and walk you through what it looks like now, and we can talk about timestamp data and the GPS location data as well.
Great. Thank you very much. And and some of our vendors have Burla. So Invista, Garrett, and some of the others, they have Burla. So talk to them. And then come to Chicago next month for the Fourth Amendment Center's Unlocking the Black Box, free 2-day CLE, May 16th and the 17th. Love to see you there.